In the early 1930s, the Empire of Japan stood at a crossroads. Its leaders believed the nation was destined to dominate Asia and the Pacific, but they also knew that the United States possessed industrial power far beyond Japan's capabilities. The Washington Naval Treaty and later the London Naval Treaty attempted to limit warship construction among major powers. Japan was forced to accept a humiliating ratio. For every 5 battleships America could build, Japan was allowed only 3. To many within the Imperial Japanese Navy, this was not just a diplomatic agreement. It was an insult to national pride. Inside naval command circles, a secret plan began to form. If Japan could not build more ships, it would build better ships, vessels so powerful they could defeat multiple American warships at once. This strategy became known as the decisive battle doctrine. At its heart was a single concept: a giant battleship, unmatched in size, armor, and firepower. A ship that could restore Japan's honor and secure its dominance across the Pacific. This dream became reality under the codename Project 798. Construction began in total secrecy at the Kure Naval Arsenal in 1937. To prevent spies and foreign observers from discovering the scale of this new warship, the Japanese government built massive wooden roofs and scaffolding over the dry docks. Workers were sworn to silence. Even members of the Imperial Diet, Japan's parliament, were not fully informed of what was being built. This ship would be called Yamato, named after the ancient Japanese province symbolizing the spirit of the nation itself. From the beginning, Yamato was designed to be more than steel and firepower. It was intended to be a floating symbol of imperial strength, the physical embodiment of Japan's rising sun. Yamato's specifications were beyond anything the world had ever seen. She displaced over 72,000 tons when fully loaded, making her the heaviest battleship in history. Her armor belts reached up to 410 millimeters thick, designed to withstand direct hits from the most powerful naval guns. And her main battery consisted of 9 46-centimeter guns, the largest artillery pieces ever mounted on a warship. Each shell weighed more than a small car and could travel over 40 kilometers. No American or British battleship carried guns of comparable size. To handle the enormous weight of these weapons and the recoil they produced, Yamato's hull was constructed with an unprecedented internal framework. The ship was wider than the Panama Canal could accommodate, which meant she would never be able to leave the Pacific Ocean. Japan accepted this limitation. Yamato did not need to travel the world. Japan believed the world would come to her. Inside, Yamato offered a strange contrast. The bridge and command rooms were reinforced with thick armor, filled with the latest optical rangefinders and mechanical computers for ballistic calculation. But deeper within the ship, sailors slept in cramped, unventilated quarters. Conditions were harsh, as was typical in the Imperial Navy. The ship carried over 2,500 crew members, many of them young men barely out of training schools, unaware they were serving aboard a legend in the making. As Japan moved closer to war, the construction of Yamato was pushed forward at great speed. Steel was diverted from civilian industries. Resources were channeled into her engines, armor, and guns. In October 1939, as tensions with the United States increased, Yamato was launched into the waters of the Seto Inland Sea. Her towering bow sliced through the surface with a slow, deliberate grace. No journalists were allowed. No foreign military attaches were invited. The ceremony was quiet, but for those who stood on the docks, it felt like witnessing the birth of a titan. By the time Yamato was completed and commissioned in December 1941, the world had changed. Only 1 week earlier, Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into war. When Yamato entered official service, she became the flagship of the combined fleet. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, chose her as his command ship. From her steel decks, he directed the early months of Japan's campaign across the Pacific. But even as crews trained aboard Yamato and officers admired her power, a quiet truth was emerging. The age of the battleship was already coming to an end. At Pearl Harbor, the devastation was caused not by big guns, but by aircraft launched from carriers. In the Coral Sea and at Midway, aircraft would again prove that the skies now determined the outcome of naval war. Yet within Japan's naval leadership, many still believed in the decisive battle, a final showdown where Yamato and her sister ships would crush the American fleet with their unmatched artillery. For now, however, Yamato remained a symbol. She rarely fired her guns in combat during her early years. She existed more as a legend than a weapon, a silent guardian of the empire, waiting for the moment she would be called into battle. In Tokyo, propaganda artists painted her as invincible. Newspapers boasted that Japan possessed warships beyond anything in America's arsenal. Civilians were not told the truth about her specifications, but they understood enough. Yamato represented hope. She was proof that Japan could stand against industrial giants. Children learned her name in schools. Sailors whispered it with pride. Yet the very qualities that made Yamato extraordinary, her size, her armor, her massive guns, also made her a relic of a fading era. As the United States rapidly expanded its aircraft carrier fleet, Japan had invested its faith in a single colossal ship. Yamato embodied both the brilliance and the flaw of Japan's wartime strategy. Unmatched craftsmanship, but a refusal to adapt to a changing world. Still, in those early years of war, few could predict her fate. Few could imagine that this steel giant, born from national pride and built in secrecy, would one day face not a fleet of battleships, but a single American submarine silently waiting beneath the waves. When the Pacific War began, Japan moved with speed and confidence. Its navy swept across Southeast Asia, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies in a matter of months. But beneath this wave of victories, a silent threat was growing. Japan's resources were stretched, its industry was limited, and unlike the United States, it could not replace lost ships and aircraft quickly. The tide was already beginning to turn. The first major warning came at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Japan's plan was to lure the U.S. carriers into a trap and destroy them, securing dominance over the Pacific. Instead, American codebreakers uncovered the plan. In a single day, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, along with hundreds of its best pilots. It was a disaster from which the Imperial Navy would never fully recover. After Midway, Japan still possessed powerful battleships, including Yamato and her newly completed sister ship Musashi. However, naval warfare had changed. Battleships like Yamato were designed for gunfire duels, not for defending against swarms of carrier-based aircraft. Despite this shift, many within Japan's high command refused to accept that the era of battleships was over. In 1943 and 1944, the U.S. military launched a relentless island-hopping campaign. American forces bypassed strongholds, cut off supply lines, and built new airfields closer to Japan. At sea, U.S. shipyards produced new carriers, destroyers, and submarines faster than Japan could sink them. While America built hundreds of warplanes every month, Japan struggled to produce replacement aircraft and lacked fuel to train new pilots. Japan's situation became critical by October 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Yamato and Musashi were ordered into combat as part of a desperate plan to crush the U.S. invasion of the Philippines. It was the moment the battleships had been built for. But instead of facing enemy battleships, they faced waves of American torpedo bombers and dive bombers from carriers like the USS Essex and USS Intrepid. Musashi was hit repeatedly, more than 20 torpedoes and 15 bombs, before she finally sank. Over 1,000 crewmen went down with her. Yamato was also attacked but survived. Still, the battle was a decisive U.S. victory. The Japanese fleet was broken, its remaining carriers nearly useless, operating without trained pilots or aircraft. After Leyte Gulf, Japan's desperation deepened. With fuel reserves nearly gone and no hope of matching American production, military leaders turned to a final, brutal tactic: kamikaze attacks. Young pilots were ordered to crash their aircraft, loaded with explosives, directly into American ships. It was a tactic born not from strength, but from hopelessness. Inside Naval Command, Yamato's role changed. She was no longer a symbol of offense, but of sacrifice. Japan could no longer maintain large fleets or launch major naval operations. The idea grew that Yamato, once a symbol of imperial pride, might have to be used in a suicide mission. Admirals debated whether she should be sent to beach herself on an Allied landing zone and fight as a stationary fortress until destroyed. Food, ammunition, and fuel became scarce across the fleet. Sailors aboard Yamato sometimes trained without leaving port because there was not enough oil to power her engines. Some crew members wrote in their diaries that they believed the empire was collapsing, but they were still prepared to die for the emperor. In early 1945, as U.S. forces closed in on Okinawa, Japanese leaders made their decision. Yamato would sail one last time, not to return but to die. The mission was called Operation Tengo. The ship was to carry only enough fuel for a one-way journey. She would fight until destroyed, serving as a final gesture of loyalty to the emperor and a symbol of Japan's refusal to surrender. But fate had other plans. Before Yamato could meet the U.S. fleet in surface combat, another hunter was already waiting beneath the sea. A small American submarine that would change history. To the outside world, propaganda still showed Yamato as invincible. But inside naval headquarters, a darker truth was accepted. Japan could no longer win the war. The only question was how it would fall, slowly, or in one final dramatic act. By late 1944, Japan's naval power was crumbling, but the Pacific Ocean was still a deadly battlefield. Beneath its surface, American submarines hunted Japanese ships with growing confidence and precision. Among them was a relatively new submarine, the USS Archerfish, a Balao-class vessel launched only 1 year earlier. Command of Archerfish was held by Commander Joseph F. Enright. He was a disciplined, quiet officer who carried a heavy memory. In 1943, during his previous command of another submarine, he had failed to sink a Japanese aircraft carrier and was removed from his post. Archerfish was his second chance, and perhaps his last opportunity to prove himself worthy of command. In November 1944, Archerfish patrolled the waters east of Japan, near Tokyo Bay. The mission was routine: search for enemy ships, attack if possible, and report naval movements. But Enright and his 80-man crew were unaware that fate was about to place them in front of the largest warship ever sent to sea. On the evening of November 27, 1944, Archerfish spotted aircraft overhead, Japanese patrol planes returning to base near Tokyo. Enright ordered the submarine to dive to avoid detection. When the submarine rose to periscope depth later that night, a large shape was noticed against the dark horizon. At first, the crew believed it was an aircraft carrier. The silhouette was massive, larger than anything they had seen before. In reality, it was Yamato's sister ship. The super battleship Musashi had already been sunk, so this enormous vessel was Yamato herself, performing training exercises near Japan's coast. Enright did not know he was hunting the pride of the Imperial Navy. But he knew one thing: this target was important. Archerfish began a long and dangerous pursuit. Yamato was escorted by several destroyers, all equipped with sonar and depth charges. If they detected a submarine, they would immediately attack. Enright kept Archerfish at periscope depth, using only the minimum speed to remain hidden. The submarine's electric motors were nearly silent, but every movement risked creating a wake visible from the sky or the escort ships. For hours, Archerfish shadowed the Japanese formation, trying to predict their direction. Yamato was steaming south at about 20 knots, unaware that a submarine lurked behind. Enright calculated that if he stayed too far away, he would lose the target. If he moved too close, he would be discovered and destroyed. It was a delicate balance, a silent duel between patience and danger. During the pursuit, Enright received a message from U.S. command stating that an enemy aircraft carrier might soon leave Tokyo Bay. He was ordered to stay on patrol and wait. Most commanders would have obeyed and broken off pursuit. But Enright made a bold decision. He ignored the orders and continued tracking Yamato, convinced that this ship was worth the risk. As night turned to early morning on November 28th, Archerfish reached an attack position. Enright calculated the intercept angle, taking into account ocean currents, Yamato's speed, and the limited range of his torpedoes. The submarine moved ahead of the Japanese formation and waited, hidden beneath the waves. Inside Archerfish, silence filled every compartment. The torpedo crews prepared 6 Mark 14 torpedoes. These weapons were unreliable. Many American torpedoes in the war had failed to explode or ran too deep. But Enright had no other choice. He would fire all 6. Shortly after midnight, Yamato came into firing range. Through the periscope, Enright could see only a dark shape and faint lights along the deck. He gave the order, "Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3." 6 torpedoes left the submarine, each leaving a trail of bubbles as they rushed toward the giant ship. Moments later, explosions echoed across the sea. Yamato had been struck. Water burst upward from her side. The escort destroyers immediately launched flares and searchlights, trying to locate the submarine. Archerfish dove deep, descending below for 100 feet, turning sharply to escape. Seconds later, Japanese depth charges began detonating around them. The submarine shook violently with each blast, but the crew held their positions. They did not speak. They waited in the darkness. After several hours, the explosions stopped. Archerfish had escaped. Enright sent a message to U.S. headquarters, "Hit large enemy vessel with 6 torpedoes." He still did not know that the ship he attacked was Yamato, the most powerful battleship in history. In Tokyo, Japanese naval officers were stunned. Yamato was badly damaged and forced to return to port for repairs. The pride of the fleet had been wounded by a single submarine. For Archerfish and Commander Enright, the hunt was over. But their place in history was just beginning. Soon, the world would learn that it was not a fleet of battleships or aircraft carriers that challenged Yamato, but a single silent hunter beneath the waves. The ocean was calm on the night of November 27, 1944, but beneath its surface, a silent confrontation had begun. The submarine USS Archerfish, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Joseph F. Enright, had discovered a massive Japanese warship moving south along the coast of Japan. The crew did not yet know its name, but they could tell from its towering silhouette and heavy escort that this was no ordinary vessel. It was Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, and Archerfish was now its shadow. From the moment the submarine detected Yamato, the pursuit became a test of patience, precision, and nerves. For more than 6 hours, Archerfish tracked the giant ship in total darkness, maintaining a careful distance, close enough to keep visual contact through the periscope, far enough to remain invisible to enemy radar and lookouts. Yamato was escorted by several destroyers, each armed with sonar and depth charges. If they detected Archerfish, the submarine would be trapped and likely destroyed. Enright understood this. He ordered his crew to operate in near silence. No unnecessary movement, no talking above a whisper. Every metallic sound, every shift of equipment could reveal their presence to enemy hydrophones. The submarine moved at a slow speed of 5 to 7 knots, powered silently by electric motors to avoid leaving a surface wake. Enright calculated Yamato's course with extreme care. The battleship was sailing a zigzag pattern, a defensive maneuver against submarines, at roughly 20 knots, heading southeast into open waters. Inside the control room, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Sailors watched depth gauges and listened for propeller sounds through sonar headphones. The periscope rose briefly every few minutes, just long enough for Enright to confirm the battleship's silhouette against the moonlit horizon. He sketched rough outlines, trying to predict its next movement. Yamato looked like a floating mountain, a dark mass moving steadily through the night, unaware of the hunter beneath. As hours passed, Enright faced a difficult choice. He received a message from U.S. Naval Command ordering him to patrol near Tokyo Bay in search of a rumored aircraft carrier. Obeying the order meant abandoning the pursuit. But Enright, convinced this target was more valuable, made a rare decision in wartime. He ignored headquarters and continued the hunt. The chase was not simple. Yamato's escort occasionally changed speed and direction. Each time, Archerfish had to adjust its position without being seen. The submarine dived deeper when Japanese aircraft flew overhead and then returned to periscope depth to maintain contact. Every maneuver risked detection. Shortly after midnight, sea fog began to rise. Visibility decreased, but Enright saw an opportunity. Fog meant the Japanese lookouts would struggle to see periscope wakes. He ordered Archerfish to accelerate briefly, closing the distance to gain a better attack angle. The submarine moved ahead of Yamato's projected course, preparing the classic tactic of crossing the T, positioning itself perpendicular to the target's path to fire torpedoes into its side. By the 5th hour of the pursuit, the crew of Archerfish was exhausted but fully alert. The submarine was now dangerously close, less than 5,000 yards from Yamato. Through the periscope, Enright could clearly distinguish the pagoda-like structure of the Japanese battleship superstructure, its radar masts, and the outline of its main turrets. He still believed it was an aircraft carrier, but the scale suggested something even larger. The final hour of the chase unfolded slowly, filled with quiet tension. Yamato maintained a steady course, and her escorts remained unaware of the danger below. Enright ordered the submarine to battle stations. Torpedo rooms loaded 6 Mark 14 steam torpedoes. Crews waited beside firing levers. In the torpedo room, sailors could feel the cold metal of the warheads, each capable of tearing open thousands of tons of steel. Archerfish now lay directly in Yamato's path. The submarine's bow was aligned at a perfect angle. Enright checked his stopwatch, recalculated firing distance, and whispered to his officers, "Stand by, prepare to fire." The giant ship moved closer, unaware it was sailing into a trap set by a vessel 1/10 its size. The 6-hour stalk was complete. The ocean held its breath. The ocean was calm, but inside the American submarine, USS Kavala, every man felt the weight of history pressing on his chest. After hours of tracking the giant Japanese carrier Shokaku, the crew knew this was their only chance. The order came in a low, steady voice from Commander Herman Kostler. "Prepare for attack." No one spoke after that. Silence ruled the submarine as it slipped deeper into the water, ready to deliver its fatal blow. Through the periscope, the massive silhouette of Shokaku cut through the waves. The carrier was surrounded by destroyers, zigzagging to protect her. One mistake meant death. Yet Kostler waited patiently. He watched the carrier turn, exposing its full broadside. This was the moment. Final bearing. Stand by. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. With a hiss of compressed air, 6 torpedoes shot into the dark sea. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The submarine held its breath. Then, an explosion ripped through the ocean surface. One torpedo struck near the bow, another hit midship, and a third detonated by the fuel tanks deep inside the carrier. A pillar of water and fire erupted. On board Shokaku, chaos broke out. Alarms screamed. Flames raced across the hangar decks. Aviation fuel, leaking from torn pipes, turned every spark into a deadly inferno. Japanese sailors fought to contain the flames, but the fire spread faster than any hose or bucket could stop. Smoke filled the corridors. Ammunition began to cook off in the heat, sending deadly fragments through steel bulkheads. Officers shouted for damage control, but whole sections of the ship were already lost. The giant of the Imperial Navy was dying, and everyone aboard knew it. Below the surface, USS Kavala dove hard to escape the coming retaliation. The destroyers above launched depth charges, each explosion shaking the submarine like a hammer on steel. Light bulbs shattered, pipes groaned, but Kostler kept the boat steady, silent, and unseen. While they withstood the assault, they knew their strike had hit the heart of the enemy. On Shokaku, the situation collapsed. The ship began to list to port. Fire reached the forward bomb magazine. At 12:08 p.m., a massive detonation tore through the hull. The carrier's deck folded like paper. Black smoke rose thousands of feet into the sky. Within minutes, the order was given, "Abandon ship." Men jumped into the burning sea as the once mighty vessel rolled onto its side. At 12:10 p.m., Shokaku slipped beneath the waves, leaving only oil, debris, and silent cries behind. Over 1,200 crewmen went down with her. Far below, the crew of USS Kavala listened to the fading sounds of the dying ship through their instruments. No cheers, no victory shouts, just quiet. They knew they had changed the course of the Pacific War. A giant had fallen. The battleship Yamato cut through the sea like a floating fortress of steel. It was the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy. 263 meters of armor, massive 18.1-inch guns, and thousands of sailors who believed she was unsinkable. But on April 7, 1945, the world's largest battleship was sailing toward her death. Her mission, known as Operation Tengo, was simple and tragic. Sail to Okinawa, fight until the ammunition ran out, then beach herself and become a stationary gun platform. No fuel for return, no hope of surviving. It was a one-way sacrifice. That morning, American scouts spotted Yamato and the small escort fleet accompanying her. Back on the USS Essex, pilots were briefed. Primary target is Yamato. Do not let her reach Okinawa, the commanders ordered. More than 380 American aircraft, fighters, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers took off into the gray sky. The final hunt had begun. At 12:20 p.m., radar operators aboard Yamato detected incoming aircraft. General quarters rang across the ship. Steel doors slammed shut. Men ran to anti-aircraft guns, and the giant turrets turned skyward. The first wave of American aircraft dived like hawks. The battleship roared to life. Anti-aircraft guns spat fire and smoke, filling the sky with bursts of steel. Pilots dodged flak so thick it looked like black clouds forming above the sea. But Yamato was only one ship. The Americans attacked in coordinated waves from all directions. Torpedo bombers came in low, aiming for the vulnerable port side. Dive bombers screamed down from the clouds, releasing armor-piercing bombs. One bomb punctured the deck near turret number 2, killing dozens. A torpedo struck the starboard side, sending a violent shudder through the hull. Water began flooding the lower decks. Damage control teams rushed to contain the breach, but more torpedoes followed. Inside the ship, chaos grew. Steel walls trembled. Lights flickered. The smell of burning oil and gunpowder filled the air. Men coughed as smoke rolled through the corridors. Still, they fought. Anti-aircraft crews fired until their gun barrels glowed red. Orders were shouted through choking smoke. But the ocean was turning red with blood and oil. By 1:30 p.m., Yamato had been hit by at least 8 bombs and 10 torpedoes. She began to list heavily to port. Captain Kosaku Aruga ordered counterflooding to balance the ship, but it only delayed the inevitable. The engine rooms started to flood. Turret crews reported ammunition fires. The ship's speed dropped. She was dying but still firing. Above, American pilots saw the giant moving slower, bleeding smoke. "She's turning over," one pilot radioed. The final strike came when another torpedo slammed into her port side. The list reached 30 degrees. Water poured across the deck. Men slipped as the steel floor tilted beneath their feet. Captain Aruga gave the last command. "All hands, prepare to abandon ship." But for many it was too late. At 2:03 p.m., a massive explosion erupted from the forward magazines. The shockwave split the ship's bow. A second explosion tore through the rear turret. Flames burst from every hatch. Those still on deck were thrown into the air or swallowed by fire. The battleship rolled completely onto her port side. The Imperial flag still flew above the tower bridge as she slipped beneath the waves. At 2:23 p.m., Yamato vanished into the ocean, taking more than 3,000 of her 3,332 crew with her. Only a few hundred survived, floating among debris, oil, and fire. The sea was silent except for distant aircraft engines and the crackle of burning wreckage. The pride of Japan had become a grave of steel. American pilots flying back to their carriers looked down at the black column of smoke rising nearly 6,000 meters into the sky. They knew they had destroyed the last symbol of Japan's naval supremacy. No chairs. Only quiet recognition that a chapter of naval warfare had ended. For Japan, the sinking of Yamato was more than the loss of a ship. It was the death of an era. A final message carved into steel and fire. No fortress, no matter how mighty, can stand alone against the sky. The sinking of the Yamato did not end with the explosion that sent her beneath the waves. Her fall created a shadow that stretched far beyond April 7, 1945. In Japan, the news was not announced immediately. The imperial government feared morale would break if the people learned that their greatest warship, the symbol of national strength, had been destroyed in a single afternoon. Only families of the dead sailors received brief telegrams. "Your son died in battle. Details classified." When the truth eventually surfaced, it was not just the loss of a ship, it was the collapse of a national myth. Yamato was built to be invincible, a fortress of steel capable of facing any enemy. People believed she could survive anything, but air power had rewritten the rules of war. Yamato's 18.1-inch guns, her thick armor, her size, all became meaningless against hundreds of aircraft equipped with bombs and torpedoes. Her death was proof that the age of battleships had ended. Survivors of the sinking carried the weight of memory. Only around 269 men out of more than 3,000 lived through the ordeal. They spoke years later of burning decks, exploding ammunition rooms, and shipmates who chose to go down with the ship rather than abandon their post. Captain Kosaku Aruga stayed aboard until the final roll. He refused rescue and died with his crew. Many saw this as the last act of true samurai spirit within the Imperial Navy. After the war, Japan was devastated. Cities destroyed, economy shattered, millions dead. The memory of Yamato became a symbol of both pride and tragedy. She represented sacrifice, but also the failure of military leadership that sent men to die in a hopeless mission. Some called it honor, others called it waste. Historians still argue. For decades, myths grew around the wreck. Some claimed Yamato was sunk by a single torpedo. Others said she was still firing as she went down. None of that was accurate. U.S. Navy records and survivor testimonies confirm she was hit by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs before the final explosion. American pilots reported the ship burning and nearly capsized before the magazine detonated. The sky was filled with a mushroom-shaped cloud of smoke and fire. In 1985, almost 40 years later, a joint Japanese research team located the wreck of Yamato in the East China Sea. She lies in 2 large sections, bow and stern separated by the explosion. The hull is upside down, buried in mud 340 meters below the surface. Seeing the wreck confirmed what survivors had described: massive damage, broken steel plates, shattered gun turrets. The ocean had claimed the giant completely. The legacy of Yamato did not end underwater. In modern Japan, she appears in books, documentaries, museums, films, and even animation. She became a cultural symbol, sometimes romanticized, sometimes used as a warning. In Kure, where Yamato was built, a museum called Yamato Museum opened in 2005. A 1/10 scale model of the ship stands there, reminding visitors of the ambition and tragedy forged in steel. Worldwide, naval historians view Yamato as the symbol of a changing era. She was the last breath of battleship supremacy and the first major proof that air power ruled the sea. Her construction showed extreme confidence in armor and guns. Her destruction showed how wrong that belief had become in the age of aircraft carriers. No other ship like Yamato would ever be built again. Her story is not just about war. It is about ambition, sacrifice, and the limits of human pride. A floating titan, born from national hope, destroyed by modern warfare. Not forgotten, not victorious, just a silent monument deep beneath the sea.